Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Magical. Today, we're going to talk about NFTs. What are they? What can they do? And what does the future hold for them? First is a quick disclosure. Demetrius and I work with Silicon Valley tech companies exploring applications around NFT technologies. So we aren't completely unbiased. We have some skin in this game. That said, we are very excited about the potential of NFTs, so we've been really looking forward to talking about it on the podcast today. Demetrius, good morning. Quick question. Have you minted any new NFTs today?
No, I have not, but I plan to try out the process at some point and kind of figure some things out. It's coming out of blockchain. It is currently the application that has, or the technology that has the most potential. I think this is bigger than a cryptocurrency.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion about the differences between NFTs and cryptocurrencies. I've been reading a lot of articles that people have said that they get very confused because of all these technical terms that are being used. So I thought it'd be like a good idea. I know you wrote a whole bunch of notes on this as we were doing research on it, to really kind of explain what is an NFT, what are they not, and what are they used for before we kind of dive into some of the use cases that you and I see as being extremely valuable and effective for future technology.
So I think, first of all, we have to recognize that the name is really funky, like a non fungible token. I'm sure everybody was looking up what is fungible. What does that mean? Anyway.
I sure was.
Yeah.
I was like, what does fungible mean? I got to look this up.
I was familiar with it. It was like, all right, let me make sure I'm right? Because it's not something you use on a regular basis, but it's pretty common, I think, amongst people in finance. But the basic idea, non-fungible means that it's unique, that it can't be duplicated. So the idea behind a non-fungible token is that it's a digital token that can be attached to any digital file. So the way I explain it to people that seems to work best for them is it's like a digital certificate of authenticity. If you go out and buy like a piece of memorabilia, if you get like a signed baseball or something like that, and it comes with that slip of paper that says, hey, this is authentic, it's signed, here's your serial number and so on. But anybody can take those things. It's notorious in the art world. You create a counterfeit, and then you just counterfeit the certificate of authenticity because it's easier to counterfeit the certificate of authenticity than it is the piece of art or whatever that you're counterfeiting. So the idea with NFTs is because they're backed by blockchain technology, which is really, really effective at preventing counterfeiting. Because anytime somebody tries to create a duplicate file on the blockchain can recognize that that's a duplicate or a fake, and it can eliminate it. So it's like a certificate of authenticity that actually authenticates, right? Because it has all this authentication built behind it. So all of these digital files, whether they are pieces of music, digital photography, a film, somebody does like a graphic design piece of artwork or something like that looks absolutely beautiful. Those are all backed by an NFT, so you can authenticate it and make sure that this is the item that the person created.
Okay, so let me stop you there for a second, because I talked to a bunch of people about NFTs that are not fully in the tech industry, and I asked them some questions about it, and this was kind of the common question that came back, and I wanted you to try to explain it from your perspective. Who's to say that D buys a image that was created of, I don't know, El Capitan in Yosemite, and they said, oh, this is an NFT, and it's authenticated on the blockchain, and then now you own it, right? Now, if I take a screenshot or I copy that picture, I could still put the picture on my computer and still have a copy of it. So how does that really protect you as the quote unquote owner of this image?
So if you take that image and you copy it and you put it on your computer, you could still do that. But what it can prevent is if you go and try to sell it. So imagine like how our experience with patents and things. If you try to go and claim that that's your photograph, you took that, you went to Yosemite, that's coming out of your camera, and you did all the work in Lightroom or whatever else in order to get to the image that you want it to be. And you try to sell it like on Getty Images or something. If it is registered, then they have a process, or they should eventually have a process for removing counterfeit items, and they can verify through the NFT based on the minting date and when the metadata on the image and when that was produced, that this item belongs to this person.
I see. So thinking about that example you just had there with Getty Images. So in the future, I'm just guessing here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the future, if you are a photographer or an image creator or anything of that nature, and let's say you upload your stuff to Getty Images, maybe one of the options on Getty Images is that it will automatically create that file into an NFT, and then you have that certificate of authenticity that you created it. And then as that particular image gets licensed or sold or whatever it is, it's always being tracked back to that unique number. Is that correct?
Yes. Obviously, there are complications to this because maybe somebody took that photo and then didn't create the NFT, and then somebody else got a copy and created the NFT to it. There's all kinds of things around that, and there will probably be things in the future, like with music players or video players, where maybe it won't even play unless it has an NFT behind it, like a readable, and you can validate, like, oh, this is a legitimate copy of this piece of art or this video, this song. But yeah, it can essentially validate that this is an official copy or the original copy of whatever it is.
Yeah, because I was thinking, like, if you and I were both in Yosemite, right, standing right next to each other and took the exact same picture, there is going to be slight differences, obviously, between them, and each one would get a unique code for it.
Sure.
And that's just how it would be kind of processed onto the blockchain. And once it's on the blockchain, now it's effectively permanent forever, right?
Mm-hmm. And there should be, to be clear, there has to be a process developed so that somebody can't just have multiple NFTs around different copies of the same item, right? So blockchain needs to be able to say, this is a copy of this other item. We need to have some kind of like digital file search or image search or whatever that happens to be to make sure that this one they're trying to mint a copy of this. Kind of like when we're doing patents, mm-hmm. the prior artwork search to make sure that it's not something that hasn't been invented previously.
So what about if you purchase the physical item? For example, let's say you purchased that Ansel Adams picture of Yosemite. Then you took with your camera a picture of it and said, oh, this is the NFT of this picture. Can you actually like own and sell that picture that you just took of Ansel Adams' picture?
Theoretically, but there still has to be the question of what gives that picture value. Like, is this a photograph of an Ansel Adams photo by somebody else who's a very famous photographer? Like something... Or is there some kind of treatment within it? Like, did you go into it and create some kind of like color correction or something like that in order to add additional value to it? Otherwise, you just have an NFT for something that doesn't have any value.
Yeah, because I keep hearing everyone talk about this idea that they could take, historical art and then scan the art. Okay, now that's a whole other thing right there, because scanning the art, taking a picture of the art, whatever your process is. But anyways, scanning the art and then associating that NFT with the actual physical art. So when they sell the physical art, you also get the NFT.
Yes. So this is one of the things that I've been thinking about quite a bit is, can we extend this technology to physical objects? So the answer I would think is potentially yes. And that's comes down to a question of what level of fidelity and resolution can you get on whatever the scan is, whether it's 2D or 3D, or if it's a recording of music, you should be able to get like a really high resolution profile of the sound signature, including things that are not audible to the human ear, and be able to differentiate between that and reproductions. So I don't know if that technology is right, it really exists yet. And if it does, if there's a way to keep people from using that technology to create really indistinguishable copies of the original. Mm-hmm. But it's a really interesting space. And I think if we can have NFTs around like very famous pieces of art or sculptures, anything like that, or even like original items out in the world, like El Capitan, for example, could be scanned so that if somebody creates something that's similar to it, like a large scale sculpture, like a Mount Rushmore or something, then you can have some level of validation around what came first.
It's interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of nuance to this stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty far afield. I mean, you really have to think about like, how are these things? We can talk about how you can NFT all these different things, and theoretically you can NFT almost anything that's out there. But like I said, when it came to NFTing the picture of the picture, ultimately, when it comes to developing applications and use cases around it, we have to think about like, where does it actually make sense from an actual use of NFT technology, like as far as it being meaningful instead of just creating NFTs to create NFTs because of hype or fun or whatever it happens to be.
Because when I think about it, I also kind of go down the rabbit hole of, well, how do you display an NFT, right? So like currently, you know, I guess you just bring it up on your computer to enjoy it there, or maybe put it into like a digital picture frame or something. I don't think we have a lot of great options for displaying these things. I think when you go buy a piece of art, you know, you have the intention of it going on your wall somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're going to probably see a lot of technology being developed, hardware technology for ways in which to display your NFTs and show them to the world or to yourself or whatever it is. Because right now it's not that exciting.
I'm not that sure that there's a reason to display an actual NFT, right? Because the NFT is the digital token. It's not the art itself. So you can display some photography, or play some music or show some video, like, just on any display. You can throw it up on your TV, but you wouldn't necessarily show the NFT itself because that's just a certificate of authentication. So
that's just the token itself. But when you're buying the rights to the token to, let's say, Beeple, right, for $69 million, right, that Beeple art, you're not getting, as far as I know, you're not getting the actual any physical art. You're just getting the token, and then you download the actual image file, and then you have that image file that you can display or look at or enjoy in one way or another, right?
Yeah. I mean, when you think about any kind of certificate of authenticity, the purpose of it isn't necessarily to enable the display of it, right? You can just get just as much enjoyment of a counterfeit Mona Lisa than you would of the real Mona Lisa. It's more for resale possibilities. So if this piece of digital art, whatever it happens to be, has any real value, then you can sell it and authenticate that this is the original copy, or something else meaningful about it.
Well, I mean, and this basically comes down to your idea around like the validating of digital items as an authentic way of kind of proving ownership. Basically, it kind of changes the whole way we look at society, right? So we already have things like patents associated with intellectual property. You actually have deeds associated with home ownership. You actually have stock grants that are associated with equity or stocks, right? Or ownership per company. This is basically adding in a whole new layer. I mean, it can replace those existing layers, but you're also a whole new layer of like, I now own this and this and this and that, right? It's like, it's almost like legitimizing every creation you can possibly think of that you've created yourself or decided that you wanted to own.
There are a lot of different applications. I mean, we're thinking about is currently in terms of like digital creations and art. But there are a lot of other applications that are potentially much bigger. Like, it's authenticating an item. So that can be a song that a music player would need in order to play, but it could also be like concert tickets, or it could be your stock certificate, right? So if you own a bunch of stock in Amazon, for example, then that could be partially in the form of an NFT, so you can validate that this is authentic stock in this company. And people could need to have like a bunch of NFTs in a crypto wallet in order to exercise voting rights when it comes to stockholder meetings and things like that.
Yeah. Well, that also kind of plays into this idea that this stuff never existed before. It actually already existed, right? I mean, meaning like we have private servers that store information to indicate ownership of certain things or rights to certain things. The only difference is because we're putting it on the blockchain, which is a distributed network. There's little bits of this information all over the place, and it can't be copied or replicated. It's very, very, very difficult. So it actually creates greater security. So it's not like we didn't already have a record that indicates D owns X stock. It's that we believe that by moving it into this new technology of the blockchain, we're basically just making that more permanent and secure, correct?
Yeah, and it is the biggest strength for any kind of blockchain technology is really that it's almost impossible to create unvalidated copies, like unauthorized copies. So if you have a bunch of stock in something right now and somebody comes along and finds a way to hack the system and create duplicates within some kind of a software system and assign those duplicates to other people, then it can mess up the system a little bit. There's a bunch of security around that to prevent that from happening, but this is ultimately a technology that makes it much more secure.
Yeah. I mean, where do you see the most, I guess I should say for you, where are you the most excited? So when you think about, you have blockchain, you have this NFT technology that's, continuing to evolve as each day practically. Where are you most excited and interested and really kind of have your finger on the pulse?
Well, one of the things I'm keeping an eye on, I think that this will really kind of grow within kind of the creator space and within digital artists. And we'll see it like, Kings of Leon put out an album, I think through NFT. Wu-Tang Clan put out a unique album a little while back that got bought out by Martin Shkreli, I think his name is pronounced. And there was a huge thing because I believe that guy's in prison now. But if Wu-Tang Clan put out a unique item, there was only one copy of it now, then it would definitely have like an NFT around it to make sure that any other copies that get created, any unauthorized copies, that this one is the one that was sold. This is the original one. But I also think that once the blockchains can increase their capacity, once they have a lot more transactions available on the blockchain, then we can see this become much, much more common. So you can have every ticket to a concert for Eminem, for example, right? Every concert can have its own NFT and you can save that as memorabilia or anything like that. But it also becomes, if you are showing up to the concert and a scalper out there has created a duplicate of that ticket with that barcode, that concert ticket will be invalidated. Ultimately, the biggest one, there are limitations on how many NFTs can be minted or exchanged or anything like that. I think it could become identification validation, right? So if you think about, we already have a digital identity since the 1930s, and they're called social security numbers, right? It's a digital form of identification for an individual. Mm-hmm. It's set up with the government. If you could basically transform us a new generation of social security numbers that are processed on the blockchain, they're basically NFTs for human beings that could have tremendous capability in reducing the amount of identity theft out there. Because if somebody else gets a copy of sees your social security number on a piece of paper or something somewhere, or they use some kind of phishing scheme in order to get it, it's useless to them because they don't have the token, the NFT, in order to actually use it.
That's interesting. And I'm sure there's some controversy around that too, right? Because a lot of the conversations I've been hearing around NFTs is the fact that things being kind of permanent and there forever creates a lot of anxiety. For example, like putting social security numbers down and knowing that this is like the permanent record for it, or even moving into social, right? Where suddenly every tweet or everything that you say online or any comment you make is permanent record for everyone to see forever because it has an associated key with it and stuff like that. It's going to change our society in a way that we kind of view our perception online.
Yeah. I think it all comes down to kind of how we implement it and how it's designed. There are definitely things that you don't want written to a permanent record, but if it's done right, it's like a social security number is basically just evidence that this person exists. And maybe there are some people out there who want to erase the existence of some other people, like they never existed. But from a legitimate standpoint, there aren't a lot of reasons to do that. But I think from a user perspective, this could absolutely be transformative. It could really reduce or eliminate identity theft. It could increase access to kind of government programs or anything related to that, making sure that anybody who's getting benefits is someone who legitimately should be getting those. And you could even just replace passwords. Like should potentially never have to input a password ever again, because you have this identity token for yourself that gives you access.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was thinking about how Andreessen Horowitz just made this $2.2 billion investment fund investing into companies that are addressing all these different needs surrounding both the blockchain and NFTs, like OpenSea and Uniswap and all this kind of stuff. And it almost feels like everyone in the investment space is trying to invest in every possibility or every use case, so to speak. And then we'll see kind of which ones stick now and which ones kind of grow in the future. I think like you talking about like getting our Social Security, information online or even deed information, like ownership of homes and things like that, seems like the bigger swing. Like it seems like that's going to happen, but maybe not for like a while, because they have to build like trust in the system. But one thing I wanted to ask you about was that when we come up with all these ideas are basically driven around use cases. And one of the things I'm not seeing right now is great user experience. Like if you actually look at how you have to go about minting some items. So I went in, I didn't even tell you I did this. I was just going to bring it up on the podcast. So I went into one of these minting applications. I'll leave its name out. And I went in to see what it would cost and how I would go about minting our logo for our company, Metricloud. I just wanted to see what the whole process is. And there was like so many steps. I mean, it was like, okay, here's the item I'm going to mint. Now I have to have a special account that links to Ether. And then that special account validates that I have Ether in there in order to pay for the gas fees. Then you upload the image. Then it determines the cost of the gas fees, which in the case of our big high quality image that was created for us, it's like $80 or something like that to mint it, right? Then it places it onto the public blockchain. Then from there, you have your rights and how you want to set up the rights and ownership of it. A lot of steps, D. This is not as simple as everyone thinks, where it's just like, oh, I upload it, suddenly everything is done automatically. It just tells me the information I need. I move on with my day. It feels like the early days of tech where people had to like learn like HTML and everything.
Yeah, this is a good analogy. This is the might even be pre-Web 1.0 kind of version of this, right? It's super early on. There's no UX design associated with it yet. Everything is just, we're developing the back end and then figuring out the front end just to have something to play with, so that we can see to some extent how things are going to work. So to be clear, none of this stuff is going to be easy at all. This is going to be complex. It's going to be difficult. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to be angry. But in the end, it's the kind of thing that over time, it can progress to something really useful and helpful. And it might take decades for a lot of the things that I'm talking about to really come to pass. But the potential is one of the things that's really, really eye-catching about this.
Well, I think right now we get obsessed with these very basic use cases, and those use cases most people need to really consider and think about are associated with validation of the technology. So we're basically trying to do the easiest things. Like when you hear Mark Cuban is, accepting Dogecoin, to buy memorabilia from the Dallas Mavericks, or he's minting tickets to see what would happen if you put them on the blockchain, all that. It's costing him money to do that. I don't think he's really making a tremendous amount of money doing that. It's a way of like testing out the technology, getting educated, finding use cases, figuring out what works and what doesn't. And I think we have to be okay with being in that space for the next couple of years until we can figure out like what companies are really going to help us achieve the overall goal or the job that needs to get done in that case. And how does the evolution of this technology change the way that our users meaning you and me and everyone else, interacts with our applications. If you just went out right now and said, oh, I have this website and I sell these widgets on here and everything you buy is on, the blockchain and it costs an extra $60 per person because NFTs are important and all that. I mean, your users would be, I don't understand. I don't get it. Why are we doing this? Why does it cost more? Ease into it. And I feel like a lot of things we're talking about, like digital rights ownership of images and videos and things like that, is a great way of testing the technology out and also putting a stress test on the actual blockchain.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because it feels like, when we were working on some technologies that were in development back in the day, like payment systems, or even when we're back to our NASA days, we're working in VR and things like that. A lot of the stuff that's going on with NFTs now was going on for us, but there wasn't all this public attention behind it. It was just something that, you got a bunch of engineers and scientists together, and we worked on stuff, and none of it was ready for prime time, but eventually it got commercialized. And that's what it feels like to me, is that there's so much hype around the technology now because that's how our world has evolved. And technology companies and technology applications have been really successful. That things that used to happen behind closed doors, or you worked out all of the kinks and a lot of the warts, and then you release a finished product, all that's being happened kind of out in the open, and everybody's looking at it and responding to it as far as like, this NFTs right now are not ready for prime time, right? Crypto right now is not ready for prime time, but these are all things that have a lot of potential and are under development.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to listen to, and this, is I like to listen to interviews and conversations with people who have been in technology for a really long period of time, like older people. Right. So like they were either engineers for 20 or 25 years, or they're, maybe huge investors now and like investing into younger entrepreneurs and stuff like that. Because I really do believe, just like a doctor who's been working in a certain field for 20 or 25 years, they have this instinct and this judgment that tends to be kind of spot on in certain areas. And one of the things that I've been hearing lately was that when it comes to moving people from one way of thinking about technology to a new way of thinking about technology, it always comes back to timing. That's why you see companies that exist 10 years prior who never go public, never scale, never do well, never get adopted, in a broad way by the general public. And then suddenly you fast forward 10 years and someone's doing literally the same thing and the company's skyrocketing and everyone's excited. And you and I look at each other like, yeah, we saw this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to timing. Like you have to align what we're building with what the needs are, with when people are kind of ready for it.
Yeah.
In some ways, it almost feels like people are ready for it because there's like a lot of complaints about stuff, being stolen, or how do I know this is mine versus yours and all that stuff. But it almost seems to be centered primarily around the creation of creative assets. Like, for example, your girlfriend is a fantastic photographer and painter, right? I look at her stuff and I think, as you post that stuff online to share it with the world, you're basically giving it away to some extent, right? Because someone can take a snapshot of it and it's instantly on their screen, or they can print it and put it on their wall or whatever it is. And this is kind of that first entry into saying, you worked really hard on building this thing. You can claim ownership first, then you can publish it to the world. And at least we'll always know that it's yours, right?
Yeah, it could really be transformative when it comes to anything related to copyright, because copyright exists, but executing it, if somebody decides to knock off your work, means legal fees and time in court and all kinds of things. It's almost like the IP economy, like we talked about before, is only really available to people who have the money to use the court systems.
Exactly. And that's why I've been thinking lately about this particular gray area here, which is if you're putting the power back into the hands of the creator, right? And that person has the rights to simply say, nope, that is mine. Here's the marker that indicates it, and I'm going to put a pause on that so it cannot be sold. Or, if you just place more control into their hands, you actually take control out of the hands of the lawyers. because whenever things get a little out of control from a copyright perspective, the first thing you have to do is open up your pocketbook, just like you said, and spend a tremendous amount of money trying to get something back that was taken from you, instead of spending your time and energy putting in the boundaries and framework around how you're going to sell that item to somebody.
Yeah. And to be clear, this also requires a lot of buy-in from the different companies that are involved, right? So if Getty Images is just like, no, we're not going to enforce anything around NFTs, then you're back to court systems and things. But we'll kind of see how that goes, and hopefully we'll get an appropriate amount of buy-in at the right time when the technology and the implementation is right, and we can iron out the kinks and whatnot, and it can be an improvement for people.
What do you think are the barriers to getting there, though, to the point where we have this large-scale adoption of most assets, either digital or non-digital, getting minted, getting put on the blockchain, getting authenticated? Like, what's holding us back at this moment? We're in 2021. Everyone's excited about it. Who's to say we can't have this thing fully up and running by 2025?
So I think that we are at a point where the back end is not mature yet. It kind of reminds me of back in the day, we worked on some video teleconferencing capabilities, some tools.
Uh-huh.
But the internet connection speeds weren't fast enough yet to really support it. So it was one of the things where you had to wait for the ISPs to catch up and provide faster internet connections so that we can provide, streaming and things like that happen now. So it is kind of like the blockchain. They're still hashing out whether or not the path forward for blockchain in general is going to be proof of work or proof of stake, or the Chia process, the proof of time and space. I think it gets pretty metaphysical at that point, but it's just basically proof of storage, right? So they need to figure out what is going to be the method of authentication in a way that's going to be ecological, economical, and effective and fast. But at the same time, computers are getting better, faster. We've got a new 2 nanometer process. IBM just announced, I think was it IBM or Intel? I think it was IBM, right? That is going to make everything faster and more efficient. And it is at the point where they need to hash out a lot of those things. It's like the TCP IP stuff back in the internet days. They need to kind of agree upon a general protocol. And then I think at some point, we're going to see a lot of those blockchains kind of consolidate. There's not going to be 50,000 different cryptocurrencies. It's going to consolidate around use cases that are going to be, maybe 5 or 10 total, right? One of them is going to be for metaverse and video games, and one of them is going to be for buying products, investable products like houses and things like that. And maybe something else can be for more general use. But all of that stuff needs to get figured out. We need to arrive at a really functional process for the back end. Mm-hmm. Then scaling, security, all those kinds of things. And then we need to get some industry buy-in. We need some people like Getty or the music players like Apple or Spotify. They need to buy in on kind of the NFT validation for whatever their creation is, try to start eliminating unauthorized copies. And we also, when it comes to the same kind of thing, industry buy-in when it comes to access platforms like OAuth and OpenID for people to use tokens. Remember those RSA ID tokens we used to have when we were working with government, NASA, FAA, stuff like that, and we had those little tokens, and the numbers would change, and we'd have to type those in. That is essentially the same, or not the same, but very similar to being able to use an NFT in order to has access to something. So the backend needs to work. Then on the front end, we need to work out the UX, and that's what you and I work on. And then we need to get buy-in from all of these corporations or the government that are actually allowing implementation.
Yeah, and it's also very costly right now. And I think part of the reason we're not seeing like a huge flood of development in the area, I mean, you're seeing a lot of people test it out. You've seen a lot of people apply it in certain spaces, but right now everyone's trying to do what you're saying is like really get the back end systems working so that we can reduce the cost of doing so. And then that would allow a lot of smaller businesses and things like that to participate in this particular area. Essentially, for the government to get involved, because they usually move a lot slower, I think what they're going to need to see is huge success in industry first. So start seeing these big companies like Apple and that kind of stuff apply this technology to their digital rights ownership within their mobile devices and basically all of their devices. And then they will lobby probably to some extent the government kind of getting in on this as a way of kind of protecting data and that kind of stuff. So I feel like everyone eventually talks to everybody, and eventually you figure out what is the new standard for doing these things. But when I think about like the most promising use cases for this in the future, the things that also come up as being like red flags is that who's to say that a company might say, oh, I want to use NFTs as a way of kind of locking down digital rights ownership for the product I'm selling, but not do it on the public blockchain, but actually do it on the private blockchain. What is the decision-making process to do that? Like, why would a company decide to do it privately instead of publicly?
Well, if they're doing it privately, to some extent, it could be that they're trying to figure out the implementation. They're trying to figure out the back end on their own. They're trying to figure out how it fits together for the UX and delivering it. It does bring up a bit of a concern about what if you now have NFTs on competing platforms that say different things, right?
Correct.
So if I'm a music producer, if I'm Skrillex or Pretty Lights or any of these guys who produce music electronically, and I come out with a audio file and I NFT it, and then somebody else gets a copy of that file and they NFT it on a different blockchain, how does that get worked out?
Yeah, it's a good question. And do those blockchains communicate with one another? If I have a private blockchain that has 300 million, people on it, let's say it's Facebook doing something privately, right? And then you have the general blockchain or the open blockchain, and someone else does it on there. Does it communicate with all the private blockchains to verify, or so many questions, questions that need to be answered, and we're not really there yet, but it's exciting because that's the whole, if you're interested in technology, if anyone who's listening right now is like interested in technology and they're just getting out of school and they're really wanting to getting into a space, I think this is a real exciting space to be in, because to me, it feels like we're starting all over again with tech. It feels a lot like it did in the very beginning when the late 90s and early 2000s, when everyone was just excited and trying to figure this stuff out and who's going to be the company to figure it out and that kind of stuff. It's a great place to be. I mean, it's what excites me. I don't feel like everything has to be solved right away. But what I will say is that compared to the late 90s and now, we tend to solve things a lot faster.
It's true. And that's one of the things that's my predictions is that somebody's going to step forward, or some company is going to step forward, and they're going to be the Walt Disney, the Elon Musk, the visionary that defines how this stuff works. They're going to establish a use case and an implementation that actually works for people, and it's going to be either very simple or very high value, and they're going to be the ones who kind of lead the way on how this gets implemented and distributed to the public.
Well, it's interesting. I was looking at Coinbase Wallet the other day, because Coinbase seems to be the leader in this space right now for the best user experience to kind of connect the general public with cryptocurrencies and NFTs and stuff like that, because within their Coinbase Wallet, they actually have a collectibles section now. So as you purchase an NFT, you can actually transfer the token to your wallet, as what it seems to be. I haven't tried it yet. And then when you click on collectibles, it actually shows up underneath there as an asset that you own.
That makes sense to some extent, especially if you're moving into kind of a secondary marketplace. Like, you imagine if you have a car collector, right? Somebody who buys $100,000 supercars.
Okay.
And they're at the point now where, hey, I want to resell this. I can use my NFT registry in order to directly list it, instead of having to do any other kind of work in order to validate that this is like an authentic Tesla or or McLaren, or what other kind of vehicle it is.
Yeah, and I also think that car ownership is another one right there, right? So
Yep.
transfer of ownership. Right now, you like fill out this paperwork, you send it to the DMV, and then they call the person, verify that they purchased it, and then they have to move your information and their information back and forth, and then they got to call the insurance company. It's like, oh my gosh, right?
Yeah.
Imagine something like this where you're like, oh, I sold this car, and then you just say, click transfer of ownership, boom, everything's transferred over instantly.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath about the DMV kind of leading the way
Yeah, exactly,
on an
right.
improvement to process like that. But yeah, I mean, the way that registration and title is handled right now, I mean, I just got my real ID and I thought the process was completely ridiculous. I know that they're doing the best that they can, but it is improved relative to what it was before. But you can definitely see how something like this can further improve that process.
Yeah. So what's your prediction for the future? You know, we've kind of talked about this stuff and outlined our use cases and the way that we're kind of thinking about NFTs and how we're excited about how it's all unfolding. But what do you predict the next couple of years are going to look like?
I think we're in the infancy. I think a lot of the to be perfectly honest, I don't think that anybody's really established themselves as an NFT producing kind of service or company that's going to stick around forever necessarily.
Uh-huh.
But I do think that one of the areas in which NFTs are really going to flourish are anywhere where there is both a creator community and a market associated. Those are the two areas where this can have tremendous value. So if you have any environment where you have a creator community like a YouTube kind of community or a TikTok, and then a marketplace associated with it, kind of like an Amazon or something like that, or an Etsy. Etsy might be an interesting place, but it would have to be more digital.
Yeah.
Maybe if DeviantArt had a real marketplace associated with it. I'm not sure if they do or not, but something like that is going to be where the rubber meets the road for this, especially in the short term.
Yeah, I would agree with you. You have to have a very clearly defined use case, and you have to have people on both sides. You have to have the creators and you have to have the buyers, and you have them within a closed ecosystem to start. So, you know, there's a lot of great companies that are looking into this right now. And I think we're going to see in the next 24 months, a lot of this NFT stuff kind of unfold in those companies and see a lot of success from it. Also because early on when something's being developed, there's a lot of people who want to buy in early, right? And get excited about it and kind of purchase up a lot of assets and things like that. And that's really good for creating buzz around the space. And then over time, it starts to broaden, right? And you get more and more people kind of playing in the space. But that's kind of where I see things going. I mean, I don't think there's much else to talk about really with NFTs today, unless we want to like really get into the nuts and bolts of the technical side, how it functions and the psychology behind it and all that kind of stuff. But I think this was a kind of good way to just dive into it. I think we should circle back with an NFT expert, somebody who's actually like implementing NFTs internally within a company, have a conversation with them. We'll pick their brain. To our listeners out there, if you have questions regarding NFTs, DM them to us at our Twitter account. And we will weave them into the next conversation that we have with somebody who is working deeply in this space on a day-to-day basis. And we'll have a really awesome and thoughtful conversation with them. As always, thank you so much for listening. This is, let's see, D, is this the second to the last episode? How many more episodes do we have left on season 3?
I think after this one, we're going to have 2 more.
2 more. Okay. So we got 2 more episodes after this. And then Demetrius and I are going to take a little break because I think we're at like 30, almost 37 episodes or something. And then we're going to come into season 4. We're going to get some new interesting interviews and just great information that we're thinking will be helpful and useful to the community that listens to us. We will be posting links to anything that we talked about today on our Twitter account. Once again, our Twitter account is at the X Podcast 1. That's the X Podcast and the number 1. If you like this podcast, we really, really hope that you will subscribe to it or leave a review on any platform that you use. It really helps us a lot and keeps us going every week. So to everyone out there, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you all next week.